Hey everybody, this is John for Pioneer Nexus MTG coming at you with another deep deck dive with Red Green Titan. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these informative deep dive content, please consider subscribing to the channel, give us a thumbs up, leave a constructive comment down below. And one side note, a few people have asked to start doing sideboarding for different matchups and stuff, and while I do think that obviously has a place in Magic, these decks are more designed as a deep deck tech than they are a complete guide to a deck. These are designed to be like 15 or 20 minutes of seeing what the decks are going to play, how they execute their strategy, a little bit of how to attack them, a little bit of how the counterplay goes. I really think that sideboard guides are a little bit meant as different things, and they do require a little bit more time and effort than I have as far as these decks in terms of how much I'm able to play or gain knowledge on them. So it will be something I'll be looking into doing in the future on this channel for different Pioneer decks, but mainly after we've covered all the main decks in the Pioneer format. So that said, what is this deck trying to do? This is a deck that is trying to use the cards Transmogrify or Luca Coppercoat Outcast to turn your creature tokens into Titans of Industry. Titan of Industry is a powerful creature from Streets of Capenna that usually comes in with 2 bodies, gains some life, blows up an artifact or enchantment, or puts a shield counter on one of your creatures, making it a difficult creature to answer. As it gets 2 bodies, stabilizes the board, usually very good against pressuring a lot of decks, although there are some strategies that this is not the be-all end-all against. Beyond that, you're playing a bunch of creature token generators, things like Fable of the Mirror Breaker, with all the other things that it does that we've covered in so many other things. It fixes the wrong half problem of the deck, it creates the copying side on the backside that allows you to churn out Titans turn after turn. Asika's Chariot, very powerful, and artifact that's seen playing a lot in Standard, and a little bit in the Pioneer format, mainly in the Winota decks before it got banned. And then things like Careful Cultivation and Courier's Briefcase, which help with both the duties of accelerating you while also putting a body into play for your Transmogrifies to hit. Beyond that, you're using a bunch of red-based removal in the early turns to keep the aggressive decks at bay. Volt, Surge, and Strangle, using them, as well as Fiery Prophecy to kind of keep your opponent's aggression at a halt. And then beyond that, Fiery Prophecy also helps you to tuck a card into your deck that you may not need, maybe an extra land, maybe a Titan that you can't cast, maybe an extra copy of Transmogrify or Luca if you're running low on Titans in your deck to go get. Then Valakut Awakening, serves as a land in a pinch, but also allows you to pitch a couple cards from your hand and see a couple fresh cards. As if your opponent's able to deal with a Transmogrify and a Luca and you can't draw another one, oftentimes you're left with kind of this deck that doesn't do a whole lot other than relying on Asika's Chariot and Fable beat down, hopefully, to get there, which isn't always enough in the format. Land-based, you have a couple Crucibles of Defiance to put some tokens to play that allow you to target. Down the Bugbear, does create tokens as it attacks while also pressuring your opponent. With Seiju, this kind of slices, it dices, it deals with artifacts, enchantments, and lands of your opponents, so it can hit things like Nykthos, Sky Sovereign, anything out of the mono green deck, etc. Castle Garenbrig enables you to cast your Titan of Industries a little bit ahead of curve if you're not drawing your Transmogrifies and your Lucas, instead you're drawing your Titans in a particular game. And then, beyond that, you're just playing a bunch of red and green duels, and then some basic force to have some basic lands to be able to go get. As far as the sideboard, this deck is very susceptible to certain things. Gruul Charm and Running Volley should tell you kind of what those things are, and that is any type heavy on flyers. Running Volley deals 4 damage to target blue or white creatures. It is primarily targeting angels and spirits. Both those decks can kind of ignore what this deck is doing, can often go around Titan and often have some form of disruption or go over the top mechanic. The spirits decks obviously have light permission that, can counter your spells early and tempo you out. The Angels decks can just simply snowball into much bigger creatures and going around what you're doing. The other card that plays in this is Gruul Charm, which deals 3 damage to each creature with flying, while also has some other applications. Creatures without flying can't block this turn, so this can kind of let your creatures attack through in kind of a without your opponent being able to block if they're a green ground-based deck like humans, and also gain control of all permanents you own. Can be relevant against whether you're playing against Agent of Treachery decks or something, an opposing Transmogrify, Indomitable Creativity style deck. One direction you could go with this deck that is not shown in this particular thing is you could instead play Indomitable Creativity and go for more of a combo build. There's a couple different combos out there. There's the Scarab God, and I can't remember the other one. It's a blue creature that comes in, creates a bunch of hasty flyers and kills your opponent. And then there is the Emrakul, the Promised End Xenagos combo, which can deal 26 flying, trampling damage out of nowhere that your opponent can't really interact with. So that there is a couple of like infinite combo, or not infinite combos, but like instant win combos that you can win. But this deck is a little bit more designed to just kind of stabilize with one Titan and then, you know, amass a second Titan, third Titan, kind of take over the game from there. And obviously, much better at casting its threats. Beyond that, Curse of Shaken Faith, primarily for anything casting a bunch of spells, whether it be, you know, the Izzet decks, whether it be the different Lotus Field combo decks. Unlicensed Tourist for any type of graveyard shenanigans, whether you're up against an Izzet Delve deck or you're up against, you know, the various Greasefang decks. This is a very nice card to have access to. Get to play Kahira because your main threat is a elemental. So, nice companion to be able to have. And then Void Winnower, this is kind of your switch out threat against something like Mono Green or the Izzet decks that really can't interact with Void Winnower, and it screws with a lot of their important threats. You know, out of Mono Green, keeps them from casting Karn and Storm the Festival. Out of the Izzet decks, keeps them casting from Thing in the Ice, keeps them from casting a lot of their spells, also keeps them from casting Arclight Phoenix, Crackling Drake. So, very good threat to have in those matchups, but is not as good as Titan in a lot of the other matchups. There are some other threats that we'll talk about, but that's what we'll be talking about in the next deck. This version's a little bit different. You're still seeing a lot of the same things. You're seeing Flame Blast Bolt as an interaction instead. You're seeing Mizzy Mortars and a Braid. So, you know, a little bit less cycling, but a little bit more damage on the spells, which can be relevant against certain different decks. Second Valakut Awakening allows you to put spells. This one's not running as many like hard lands, but instead you're running, you know, some of the Modal Face lands, Spike Field Hazard, Turn Timber Symbiosis, Shatter Skull Smashing. Allows you to play a little bit more spell density in your deck. Nissa Voice of Vindikar, another card that puts tokens into play, can also, you know, kind of take over the game on its own, although mainly this is just to create a bunch of tokens, you know, pair it with your Fable the Mirror Breakers and your Seeker's Chariots and stuff. Once again, relying on Transmogrify and Luca. This version's only running 3 Titans as opposed to 4, although oftentimes 3 Titans should be enough to win the game. There are some matchups where you do need a 4th one, as crazy as that sounds. Sideboard, you're seeing a lot of the same cards. You know, you're running Volleys and Anger of the Gods to deal with small creature decks, especially, once again, Spirits giving you fits. Alpine Moon for Nykthos and Lotus Field. The one card I wanted to concentrate on was Rorkthar the Unbowed. This kind of takes the Curse of Shaken Faith and puts it on a body. Whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, Rorkthar deals 6 damage to that player. Very good in a lot of matchups, whether it be the control decks, whether it be against the various Izzet decks, etc. You know, this really puts the pressure on them. Also has Vigilance and Reach. So, you know, it can be a hard creature to deal with. You know, not the easiest creature to kill at 6 mana. And it is a 6/6. Chandra Awakened Inferno as another uncounterable threat, which can be relevant against decks that are trying to counterspell you out of the game, whether it be blue-white control, the various Spirit and Tempo decks, and Void Winnower we've already kind of talked about. This version might be a little bit older one, as I'm seeing the red cap melees, which just aren't as effective in the format right now. But, you know, you're seeing a lot of the same things. You're seeing your Chandra, your Nissas, you're seeing your Fables, the Transmogrifies. One Chandra Torch of Defiance in the main deck is quite nice. This helps with your mana issues as far as like ramping into your Titans, while also interacting with your opponent, and helps you switch up in the mid-range plane out of the sideboard. Beyond that, you have more Nissa's Voices of Zendikar. So basically this is much more effective against the control decks, as you have a bunch of Planeswalkers to kind of sideboard into, and you're just kind of pounding your opponent with constant threats. You know, 3-drop they have to answer, 4-drop they have to answer, 5-drop they have to answer. And it can kind of overwhelm the control decks, which otherwise could be a problematic matchup. Running Volley, obviously very good against the Spirits decks. Fry also kind of comes in that combination, but also can target things like Teferi. Red Cap Melee, like I said, this might have been a holdover from before Winota got banned, but still okay in the red-based matchups, especially against mono-red aggro. Anger of the Gods for any type of creatures. Once again, Spirits and mono-red can be a little bit of a tricky matchup. Chandra and Chandra's Awakened Inferno kind of gives you these extra cards to bring in against control. Then Void Winnower, we've already talked about being very good against mono green and being serviceable against the Izzet based decks. So how to approach this deck, how to attack the deck. So I did not have the ability to play this on MTGO anymore, as the master accounts that were available for like the last 3 weeks have kind of faded into oblivion, as you know, it was for a limited time thing for the 20th year anniversary of MTGO. But I've been playing it some on an Explorer on Arena, and the one thing I really noticed is the deck struggles against blue-white X control, the blue spirit based decks, the angel decks can go over the top of it, and some other decks, potentially like humans and stuff, if you don't draw the removal, half of your deck can overwhelm them just by sheer power and going wide. So a lot of it is against the creature-based decks, especially the ground-based ones. You need to keep them controlled early and then tighten the mid to late thing, and then force your opponent to react to your board situation with your Asika's Chariots and your Fabled Mirror Breakers and such. Oftentimes that's what you did with Winota when you were playing a Winota deck, is that you'd force your opponent to answer your board, and then you get like an unchecked Winota turn, and then kind of go nuts from there. This deck has a lot of the same things. While the Transmogrifies and Lucas are blanked by removal, there are ways to play around it that kind of forces your opponent to respect that, and then you get to, bam, hit them with this big Titan. And then, if you can untap, Titan, put a shield counter on your Fable token, all of a sudden untap and you're making Titans every turn. Very difficult for a lot of decks to win, although there are some decks, especially like Angels, that can overpower them with their game plan, especially if you can't start killing them once they start hitting a certain point. Hence why I can understand the Mizian Mortars as 4 is an important toughness in that matchup. One of the things I like about these builds on MTGO in the full Pioneer format is having access to things like Nissa and Chandra in the post-board games, especially against blue-white control. Because blue-white control really doesn't care about Titan of Industry. Whether it be they can exile, the tokens, just etc., or just counter irrelevant threats, because this deck doesn't play a lot of threats. It has a lot of error. You have a lot of removal spells, you have a lot of these token generators and such that, while they're important for the strategy, don't really threaten blue-white control that much. So they can just sit back and counter your Transmogrify or kill your token, and counter your Luca, So it's not like mono green where there's threat after threat after threat after threat. This deck is basically a one-trick pony in terms of its main game plan, and if you can answer that, a lot of times the secondary game plan isn't good enough against a true control deck. So if you're looking to beat this deck, you want to play a Flyers-based aggression deck, whether it be Angels or Spirits, or simply be able to answer everything. One of the matchups that I watched from one of the few streamers that have done stuff with this deck, the 5-color Nib was able to not care about Titan. It was just able to answer the 2 bodies, move on with its life, and then eventually close out the game. Another way you can try to approach it is disrupting with Thoughtseize and stuff, and then closing out the game before they can recover. But that's a dangerous strategy, as this deck is kind of designed to go over the top of things like red-black mid-range and stuff. So that's not the best of approaches. If you want to answer this, it's basically counter spells and pressure, or just a hard control deck. As you can see, this deck has a lot of things designed to attack those strategies, whether it be a bunch of planeswalkers and uncounterable stuff, for the blue-white control decks, things like Chandra and stuff, which would be great to have access to in the Explorer format, not the Pioneer format, as Nissa Voice of Zendikar is not currently available on Arena, but things like Chandra Awakened Inferno and Chandra Torch of Defiance are. But most of my practice has been in the best of 1 matchups, so kind of get a feel for what matchups are good, what matchups are bad. Decks like Mono Red feel like they should be able to get under this, but 1 Titan kind of stabilizes the game, and once you start chaining Titans, whether it be with a Fable, copying Titan, or just getting a second Titan into play, oftentimes that's enough to just close out the game against Mono Red. One card that was a bit tricky was the Dinosaur out of Mono Red, keeping from getting life and taking damage every time you get a body into play. A little bit of a tricky card. Name's kind of escaping me at the moment. Frostodon. Rampage. I'm not Rampaging Frostodon. But Frostodon was a problem. Just little things like that, little different angles of attack can be a problem. One card that actually keeps the combo from happening is Grafdigger's Cage. So if you happen to be playing mono green, your first card target should probably be Grafdigger's Cage, because that keeps the Titan from entering the battlefield from the library. So there's different, like I said, there's a lot of different angles of attack of how to attack this deck, But the main strategies that are very good against it happen to be the Spirit Pressure decks and the hard control decks. You know, whether it be an over-top mid-range deck like Nib that just has answers to all the different stuff it's doing, or, you know, different things like blue-white control and such. That's why you're seeing a lot of the ways this is. I don't suspect Mono Green's a very particularly good matchup, as Mono Green often doesn't care about Titan of Industry, what it's doing. The Void Winnowers could certainly be problematic, you know, whether that's enough to win the game on their own. I don't have any experience with that, so I don't know how the Mono Green matchup versus this goes. But those are kind of the main strategies that I've seen that have been effective against this strategy. And, you know, this deck's a lot of fun. It's much like the red-green ramp deck that popped up. You know, it does very powerful things, but if those powerful things aren't good enough, or you're going to just ignore it and go around it, you know, you really need a follow-up plan to be able to win the game from there. But that's kind of my quick rundown on red-green Titan, as it was requested by one of our viewers. So hopefully that helps them out with what they were looking for. But, you know, it's a fun deck. And then there was one variant of it that I only think I saw once that was running a light black splash for Obnixilis. You know, being able to copy an Obnixilis into a Titan of Industry, all of a sudden you can, you know, sacrificing a Titan of Industry, you get to ultimate Obnixilis instantly. Very powerful. Maybe that helps in the control matchups, much like the presence of Nissa, Voice of Zendikar. But I think with the mana, you might want a little bit more consistency with the red-green. And as I've said before, there are other things you could run, like Indomitable Creativity instead. You know, get the Emrakul plus Xenagos, God of Revels. You know, one-shot kill, or the Scarab God. I forget what the name of the Scarab God combo that runs with one of the blue creatures that creates a bunch of tokens and kills you. You know, so there's a couple different ways you could take this deck if you just don't want to run Titan of Industry. But, you know, it is something you should be aware of in the format. Doesn't see a ton of play, but is a deck that does pop up now and again, and it's going to be quite fun. So, as always, this has been John for Pioneer Nexus MTG. Let me know what deck you want to see in the next video. Our next video will probably be 5-color Niv, as I've seen that requested a few times, but, you know, beyond that, no plans specifically. So, let me know what you want to see in the next video.